Hey, juniors, psych juniors, what's up? I hope y'all had a great weekend. And today we're just gonna jump into Unit 3, 3.11, cognitive biases or biases. This is actually our last topic for Unit 3. So if things will be a little different this week, just that it's one lesson and then one kind of like project-based assignment. So this is really the only video of me you'll have to watch this week, and I'll explain everything you need to do in this video. So go ahead and set up your notes or your notebook to take notes. We're learning about cognitive biases today, and then I want you to do a little bit of review of what you learned at the end of last week, which is what are heuristics, and can you give an example of a heuristic? So go ahead and take a second to try that, and I'll meet you back here. So hopefully you said that a heuristic is some kind of mental shortcut that we use to make our decisions easier. And you learned about the representative heuristic in the video that you watched, I'm pretty sure. So you could have given that as an example. And we're going to go through them more today if you weren't quite sure on them. So log on to office hours Monday and Thursday from 12 to 12:30 to share what you learned, to share your answers to these questions, or just to get help on your assignments for this week. Just know that I am there for office hours when you need me. So please, please, please be reaching out because I want to be helping. Okay, let's jump right in. So our guiding question for today is, to what extent do biases in thinking affect the accuracy of decision making? And you'll be tested about this on your IB test next year. And I realize I totally forgot to change why it matters in life. So, why does this matter in life? Let's think about how might different biases that you have affect how accurate your decisions are. And knowing about these cognitive biases can actually help you in your daily life. A lot of advertisements, a lot of companies use these biases to get you to spend more money. And so just being aware of them can make you a more critical consumer, which is pretty cool. And then here's my meme. If you don't understand it yet, ooh, could you hear that? It's thundering. Sorry. If you don't understand it yet, you'll understand it by the end of today. It says, it's called confirmation bias. I've already made up my mind. And debating you is a waste of energy. So confirmation bias is when you are only going to take information that confirms your belief. So there's no reason to debate someone who's only using confirmation bias. Anyway, okay. So what are heuristics? Let's talk about it. Heuristics, you should have already gotten this last class, but in case you didn't, you can write it down. They are simple decision-making rules that people use to make decisions more efficiently. In short, heuristics are basically like a mental shortcut. So I love this picture of a heuristic. This would be like your normal logical, maybe you could think of it as like your system 2 brain thinking through some kind of problem. This orange arrow, that is a heuristic. It's a mental shortcut to kind of get you to the end. And I am going to try these names. I think it's Tversky and Kahneman in the 1970s. They basically demonstrated 3 heuristics or cognitive biases. So if you just replace the word heuristic with a cognitive bias, that's fine. And they found 3 different heuristics that hinder effective thinking and decision making. And these are the 3 that they found. They found anchoring and adjustment, which counts as just one, representativeness, and availability. This is 3 of many, as you're going to see, but those are the 3 that we're going to like mainly delve into today. So let's jump in. What is the anchoring and adjustment heuristic? So anchoring and adjustment is going to begin with a statement or suggestion that's going to influence a person's subsequent decision. So you watched the video about the anchoring heuristic, hopefully, where there was a jar of jelly beans, I think, and she said, do you think there's more or less than 6,000 jelly beans? So that giving you that anchor of 6,000 actually affects your subsequent decision that you make, or your subsequent guess that you make. So here's another example. Let's say a person's asked whether a tribe leader was more than 100 years old when they died. They're more likely to estimate that leader's age of death as higher than if I asked them the same question, but instead if I said more than 100 years, were they more than 35? So I give you an anchor and then you adjust your answer based on that. Another real life example that maybe you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I've done this. It's often used in advertisements and like store promotions all the time. So let's say you're at a store and there's a promotion that says like limit 12 per customer. If they put that sign out that says limit 12 per customer, that's going to result in people buying more than if there was no sign, or than if the sign stated limit 6 per customer. So giving people that anchor is going to actually change their decision. So if you look at this picture I found for anchoring bias, says think of a 2-digit number, and you have two people who thought of two different numbers, and then ask them how much they'll bid for a bottle of wine. And that anchor actually affects the decision that they make. Here is a research example, if you want like a real research example that's also kind of pertinent to y'all's life and mine as a teacher and you as students. Caverny and Perry in 1990 gave 48 teachers a set of student essays, and they also gave the teachers a list of fictional grades for all of these students. And what they found was that the higher the average fictional grades were, the higher the grade given by the teachers for the essays they graded. So the fictional grades basically acted as these anchors, and they affected the teacher's judgment, and then the distorted grade given was the adjustment or the change behavior. So that's kind of a summary of the anchoring heuristic. And let's go ahead. Sorry, I also found this picture. A lot of people use this anchoring heuristic to their advantage. And if you think about first impressions, this is why people often say first impressions are so important, because your first impression of someone is going to be their anchor of you. And so there's a lot of talk about, okay, well, how do you make great first impressions so that people have a really positive anchor of you in their memory? All right, let's jump into the next one. The next one is the representativeness heuristic. This is the idea that people are going to mistake representativeness with likelihood or probability. And that definition always confused me, so I'm hoping the example I give will help you out with this one. So here's the example. John lives in a medium-sized city with a university and is described as logical, unemotional, and interested in patterns. Which job do you think John is more likely to have? A doctor, a police officer, or a math professor? So go ahead and make your guess. He lives in a medium-sized city with a university. He is described as logical, unemotional, and interested in patterns. So what usually happens is that most people actually say that John is more likely to be a math professor because John seems representative of what a math professor is. But if you're thinking about like strictly likelihood or probability wise, it's actually going to be more likely that John would be a police officer, just based on probability, because in a medium-sized city, less than 1% of a population is going to be math professors, whereas about 5% will be police officers. So this representativeness heuristic is basically this idea that if you represent this aspect of a group, maybe you'll be part of that group, even if the actual probability for that group is low. Okay, I think it's working. My computer was being weird. Okay, last but not least in this little group of three, from I always forget their names, y'all. I know it's hard to remember their names. From Tversky and Kahneman's research is the availability heuristic. So let's go ahead and talk about the availability heuristic. So this picture basically explains the availability heuristic. It is, if you look at this picture, you see all these people swimming, right? And then we see a woman eating a cheeseburger, a man drinking and smoking a cigarette. But on his lap, if you look really closely, it says, and I have to look really closely too, second shark death in 5 years. And then he says they must have a death wish to swim in that water. So it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek idea here, is that these people probably have a less likelihood of dying in the water than these people do from the habits they're engaging in, but the availability heuristic leads someone to make a comment like this. They must have a death wish to swim in that water. So the availability heuristic is basically the error of mistaking readily available examples as the typical sample. So basically mistaking like readily available news as what the world is really like. So Tversky and Kahneman explain that the availability heuristic as the ease with which examples come to mind. So Here's an example. If you have a lot of close friends and family members that suffer from heart disease in their mid-50s, then the availability heuristic would basically lead you to the conclusion that many or most people suffer from heart disease in their mid-50s. This often gets related to like the news. So a lot of people, if you talk to your parents, or at least if I talk to my parents, it's always like, oh, well, the world is just getting so much more dangerous and there's more crime and there's more disease and there's more terrorism or anything. And basically, when you look at the real data for like crime, it's actually shown that crime rates have reduced over the years. But because we're on this 24-hour news cycle, this news of crime is always available. So people have this idea in their head that it's more dangerous than it really is. Some other examples. Gilovich and Griffin asked participants if there were more words starting with M than words with M as their third letter. On my apartment are just like going crazy today. Okay, sorry y'all. So here's a research example for the availability heuristic. Let's say I ask you guys this. If there were, do you think there are more words that start with the letter M or that have M as their third letter? Most people are going to say that there are more words that start with the letter M because it is easier and it requires less cognitive effort for you to think of words beginning with an M than for you to think of words where M is the third letter. It's just way less cognitive effort to figure out a word that starts with M. I mean, try it right now. Like, I can think of words that start with M. Mattress, M&Ms, I don't know. But thinking of words that have M as the third letter is actually really difficult. I just came up with hamburger though, so there is one. So people tend to say that there are more words that start with an M than have M as their third letter, when in fact, there are actually more words with M as their third letter. I looked this up. There's like 3,000 words or something that start with an M, but there's 11,000 words with M as their third letter. But your availability heuristic, basically, the blue is like all the information. The red is the information that you use to make a decision because it's available to you, or it's easy to access. So those are the main three that Tversky and Kahneman came up with. And then there's a couple more that are interesting. So here are some more heuristic or cognitive bias examples. First, confirmation bias. So that's the one that we talked about with our meme at the beginning of class. Confirmation bias is when people select or interpret information to confirm their existing idea or belief. Confirmation bias often leads to the strengthening of schemas and stereotypes, and it also results in overconfidence of personal beliefs. This is a really good picture that explains confirmation bias. So on the blue side, you have objective facts. On the red, you have what confirms whatever you already believe. And then basically the Venn diagram where it overlaps, that's confirmation bias. That's what you're going to choose to focus on because it confirms what you believe in. And all this stuff that's going to lay here that maybe does not confirm what you believe in will be stuff that gets ignored. The illusory correlation, we learned about this a while ago when we learned about stereotypes. The illusory correlation is a false conclusion that events occurring at the same time are related. Or we learned about the illusory correlation when I showed you group A and group B, and there were some positive and some negative statements from members of group A and B, and then you had to rate group A and B. And if you remember, there was the same proportion of comments. So like group A, I gave you like 16 positive and 8 negative, whereas group B, I gave you 8 positive and 4 negative, but because of the size, you made a correlation that group B was more negative. We did that a long time ago, but another example would be just concluding that two events are related because they happen close to each other. So an example would be a student who did well in a test when using a pencil leads to the conclusion that the pencil caused the success. Another example could be the halo effect. The halo effect is a false correlation of positive characteristics. So an assumption that someone who has a few positive characteristics has many, and we often associate this with physical attractiveness. So people often assume if someone is physically attractive, then they're going to have other positive traits as well. And believe it or not, there are even more, and there are even more than the ones I'm going to show you right here. Optimism bias, this is a belief that you yourself are less likely to experience a negative event. This one I feel like I experience a lot. Oh my gosh, y'all, it is hailing outside. I'm sorry, this is crazy. Literally hailing. Let's see if you can see it. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. But that's just crazy because it's April and there's literal hail outside. Okay. Sorry. This is why I've been crazy because like there's so much going on outside. Okay. Anyway, optimism bias. I definitely experience this idea that you're like less likely to experience a negative event. The peak end rule. This is the idea that people are going to judge an experience based on how they feel at its peak, which is its most intense point versus at its end, rather than the total sum or average of the experience. So people are going to remember how they felt like at the most intense point of an experience and at the end. So maybe even if there's like a low point in the middle, if that's not the most intense point, then it won't really come into their feelings about it. The effort heuristic, the quality or worth of an object is determined by perceived amount of effort that went into producing the object. That's definitely true. Think about like the food industry. People put a ton of worth on food that takes a long time to produce or that has a lot of care given into it, and we pay more money for that. So that's the effort heuristic. Another one is the endowment effect. This is the idea that people are more likely to retain an object they own than to acquire the same object when they do not own it. So this means people are more likely to keep what they own than, like, let's say that you have a lottery ticket. Let's say you bought the lottery ticket for like $5 and I offer to buy the lottery ticket off of you for 10. You are more likely to keep that lottery ticket even though you probably aren't going to win the lottery with it. So you're just more likely to retain what you already own than acquire the same object when you don't own it. The affect heuristic, different than the effort. Affect is just the idea, this probably should make sense, that people are going to make decisions based heavily on their current emotions. And then last but not least, the similarity heuristic. This is the idea that people are more likely to judge an object positively if it is similar to one they already prefer. I think about the similarity heuristic with like books all the time. So you are more likely to positively judge a book if you have read a book similar to it that you already like. So, for example, like let's say you love the Harry Potter books like me, then you're probably going to judge other science fiction, fantasy books more positively because you already prefer one. Okay. So let's explain. These are basically your activities for the week. So you took your notes, and now here's what you need to do. The first thing I want you to do is watch some final videos on heuristic. There's two. You can take some notes on them if you need for anything that you feel is important. Take some notes. So on Google Classroom, firstly, watch the one, Why Are We All So Stupid? About the availability bias. And then I also want you to watch the TED Ed video on heuristics and take a few notes if you need for those. And then your main assignment that you're gonna need to do is I'm asking you to create a public service announcement on cognitive biases. So basically, it is your turn to communicate the danger of cognitive biases. So this week, your one major assignment is to create a public service announcement or a PSA on any cognitive bias of your choice, and you can create it in any format you want. So please be creative. Here are some things that I came up with just off the top of my head. You can make a short video, you can make a podcast, a commercial, a poster, a brochure, an art piece, or a comic strip. Those were just the ones I came up with in like 30 seconds. It can literally be anything. You have 4 goals that you have to meet with this activity / project. That's why I'm only giving you one thing this week because it's a little bit more. The first thing, I need you to tell me which cognitive bias you're doing and define it. I want you to give an example of a study. Now for this one, I want you to find the study on your own because I would love if I get PSAs on all of these different cognitive biases that I gave you. I gave you so many rather than just the 3 that we talked about more in depth. if you want to talk about one of these three we talked about more in depth, which was anchoring, representativeness, and availability, that's obviously fine. But I don't want you to use the research I already gave you. I want you to find your own research. So pick one that you think is really interesting. If you really think the halo effect is interesting, go for it. Which means I just probably gave you guys an anchor, and a lot of you are going to choose the halo effect now, but hopefully I didn't. Or if the peak end rule interests you, any of these things, pick it, okay? So, define the cognitive bias, give an example of a study that you find on your own, use JSTOR or Google Scholar, that will help you, and basically you're finding a study in which this cognitive bias was shown. The third thing, give a real life example of how the heuristic is used. A lot of advertising agencies use heuristics, so you could probably use that as an example. And then explain how the bias can be avoided. So explain how you can avoid the bias in your everyday life. This is due Friday at 11:59 p.m. on Google Classroom. I'm going to have an assignment for you, so you just turn it into the assignment slot. Other than that, that is all I have for you for this week. So basically your assignment this week was 1, to do these notes. So you've already done it. Good job. And then go watch those videos. And then your second assignment is to create that public service announcement. I'm looking forward to seeing how creative you guys get to be. Be creative. It should be fun. And if you need help with any of this, please just log on to office hours from 12 to 12:30. And I can help you with this PSA if you have questions. But other than that, I hope y'all have a great week and a good weekend, and I miss you. Bye.